Hello, pattern readers. I'm here to discuss episode 5 of The Rings of Power, Partings. This video is coming out later than I had planned, so to be clear, it will contain spoilers for episode 5, but not for episode 6. I'm using episode 5 to discuss how the show is exploring a major theme, hope versus despair. In my last video, I did a mid-season review, and I talked about how the first 4 episodes were mostly setup. Enjoyable setup, but a slow burn setup nonetheless. Dare I say it, this episode is starting to feel different. The pace of the plotting is still slow, but it does feel like we're starting to move into payoff territory. And the reason why I think it feels like that is because we're starting to see a clearly articulated major theme taking place, and that is hope versus despair. There are a few things in storytelling I love more than a well-articulated theme, so let's dig into it. The Harfoot storyline begins with Nori teaching the stranger. He learns the word peril and then applies it to himself. Nori denies this, saying he's not a peril, he's good, he's there to help. I think the events of this episode would suggest that he is both perilous and good. He uses his power to try and protect the Harfoots from the wolves, and in doing so, he injures himself, perhaps showing that he is not fully in control of his powers. And then he uses ice magic to heal his arm, and in doing so, accidentally hurts Nori. But more than anything, I think he represents hope. Certainly in a small way, he is the only hope for the survival of Nori and her family, and perhaps all of the Harfoots, given the growing peril and evil in the world. And in a larger sense, he's likely to be one of the greatest hopes against Sauron, because the smart money is still on him being Gandalf, sent to Middle-earth to oppose Sauron. Or at least he's one of the other, is Tari. What about him using ice? Isn't Gandalf known for fire? Yes, but I could see this use of ice being a corollary to his known ability with fire. In both cases, we're talking about manipulation of heat. And then think about the fact that Gandalf was able to defeat a Balrog, a being of fire. But it is still possible that he could be one of the other wizards. In the Harfoot story, we also have an expression of despair in the character of Malva. She would not only be willing to leave the Brandyfoots behind, but she actively is attempting to convince Sadok to steal their wheels, force them to stay behind, and they would surely perish. That is cold-blooded. But I think it also comes out of a place of despair, because I think she has no hope that the Brandyfoots can survive. She seems to think no matter what anybody does, they're not going to make it, and she's afraid that they will endanger herself and the rest of the Harfoots. But most of all, there is the Wandering Song that Poppy sings, because what could be a greater expression of hope? I have to say, I think starting the episode with this song was a big reason why this episode worked so well for me. It was so moving. I love a good fantasy song that makes you feel. Think Weep for Manetheren in The Wheel of Time, or Pippin's song as Faramir makes a futile attempt to retake Osgiliath. The words in the Wandering Song: "My strength tells me no, but the path demands yes. Not all who wonder or wander are lost, no matter the sorrow, no matter the cost." Oh, I just love it so much. If any character is an embodiment of despair, Adar seems a good candidate. He stands in the sun, telling one of his orc followers that soon the sun will be gone, and with it, the part of him that knew its warmth as well. Doesn't seem to bring him any joy one way or the other. He just seems resigned to it. A huge part of the exploration of hope versus despair in this episode comes in Bronwyn's story. She starts out as the strongest figure of hope in that plot line. She is trying to lead others to follow her and fight back. But then we have Waldreg. He has perhaps a sense of false hope that surrendering to the enemy is going to gain him anything, and he is successful in leading a big group of others to follow him. I would say what his path is really a path of despair, because again, there is no hope that resistance would do any good. And his actions do start to push Bronwyn herself towards despair. Whatever hope Waldreg might have had that joining with the followers of Sauron would gain him power, that's pretty quickly shown to be delusion. He is slammed by Adar for even calling him Sauron, and then forced to kill a child, Rowan. There can be no hope when a child is begging him for mercy and he does not give it. In contrast, you have Arendir trying to spark some hope in Theo, and he's taking the time to encourage him, to try and teach him, and it's actually successful. This really surprised me that, for a moment at least, hope did win out in Theo, and he decided to trust Arendir enough to reveal to him this hilt that he had been hiding. Arendir recognizes it and reveals that the place that they are sheltering in contains a sort of shrine to Sauron. He sees some potential hope in this key, as he calls it, but when he shows it to Bronwyn, she takes it very differently, and this pushes her fully into despair. It was painful to hear Bronwyn say that perhaps her people were destined for darkness, that this is who they are. And as Arendir says, her people worked for generations to earn back their virtue, but she could undo it in one moment of despair. It's a very dark place to be in leading into this assault. Shifting to Numenor, Elendil rightfully tears into Isildur over his recent decisions and his expectation of nepotism. I was surprised to find I had somewhat mixed feelings as I was watching this scene. I have no love for the character of Isildur. I think he's been annoying since the get-go. But I did feel that in this episode, he was trying to light a spark of hope in himself, and to have his father be one to extinguish it, that was rough. There was another similar scene that happens with Valandil later. That one was a little funnier, to be honest. I have to say Isildur probably deserved to get punched, but there was one line that did stand out. Valandil says to Isildur, "I hope you find something that you would be willing to sacrifice anything for." And that is the hope underneath it all, that they would all find something worth sacrificing for, something worth living for. Even worse than Isildur in this episode were his sister Eärien and her friend Kemen. Wow, I need to go back and rewatch because I did not see any hints earlier that Eärien would join up with the group who were acting on anti-elf sentiment. And in general, I have to say that whole strain of anti-elf, isolationist thinking in Numenor, that seems to me predicated on despair, because it's this idea that by joining with others, by joining with elves, with the people of Middle-earth, it would make them weaker rather than stronger. And Eärien definitely seems desperate to stop the Numenorian ships from going to Middle-earth. It's just unclear whether that's just because she's worried about her father, or does she also agree with the isolationist thinking? I don't know, but there's definitely fear involved. Kemen tries to spread that line of thinking to his father, Pharazôn. Wow, does he suck in this episode. Shooting straight down my list of favorite characters right to the bottom. He thinks his father should sooner die than take orders from an elf. No mystery why he has chosen this path of despair. Pharazôn, I guess, also sucks, but is at least smart. I'm not sure that's actually better, but he at least sees the advantage to having allies. Not for any altruistic reason, but at least he's not in despair mode. When Kemen and Isildur are opposed, it was hard to decide which one of them was going to make the worst decision. Turns out to be Kemen. Isildur's hope was not extinguished, and he wanted to go to Middle-earth badly enough that he was willing to stow away. Kemen, on the other hand, did not take anything from what his father said to him about the potential advantages to Numenor, and he decides to just double down, going so far as to commit arson to stop the expedition. I don't necessarily think it's such a great thing that Isildur ultimately gets what he wants by saving Kemen and not revealing him, but I guess we'll see where his hope takes him. Miriel is a figure of hope. She believes that restoring their connection with the elves, going to Middle-earth, will save Numenor. Surprisingly, her father warns her against this, saying there's no hope for her there. In Tolkien lore, Tar Palantir has foresight, so it's likely there's some truth to what he's saying. But as we've also seen in The Lord of the Rings with Denethor, sometimes foresight can be misleading and can lead to despair. This doesn't seem to daunt her, though, but what does cause some doubts is Kemen's sabotage and Pharazôn's counsel of delay, both of which were designed to encourage despair. Galadriel and Elendil work together to bring some hope to the young Númenórean recruits. I won't fully disagree with anyone who felt like these sword training scenes weren't wholly necessary. Of everything in the episode, they probably did feel the most like treading water. But in a way, I am glad we are allowed the time to see something like this, because why should we assume that these young Númenórean soldiers would have any idea how to kill an orc or be of any use against them? So at least we're getting a nod to their need to be prepared. And Valandil being raised to lieutenant does also give a spark of hope. Halbrand is another character of balance between hope and despair in this episode. He seems to believe that his hope lies in working in a forging guild in Numenor. And there's no question that he despairs of ever regaining any place that he once had in Middle-earth. Galadriel pushes and pushes him because she knows that working in a forge isn't going to do it for him, and because she finds hope in him, and she knows that the true hope of the expedition really relies on him. We see more fully into Halbrand's despair, and I really like the way they placed his words about what he had done before he ended up on that raft over the scene of Waldreg leading men to surrender, to Sauron as he believes it, really to Adar. I am really interested to find out more of what Halbrand did in his past that has led to his current despair. In one of my favorite scenes, Galadriel pulls out all the stops to try and spark some hope in Halbrand. She brings back her brother's words to her. Sometimes to find the light, we must first touch the darkness. And when he demands to know why she won't stop fighting, she reveals to him, as perhaps she has done with no one else, her pain and her guilt. Her company and her friends, as she believes, could no longer distinguish her from the evil that she was fighting. I'm so glad we had this reveal at this time because I think it helps to understand Galadriel's actions. She knows she's gone wrong at times. She just can't stop because she doesn't know how. She doesn't know any other way. Until now, maybe. I think the gradual change we've seen in her approach with both Halbrand and Miriel show that maybe she's starting to learn. Another moment that I think perfectly shows that struggle between hope and despair is Halbrand with that sigil pouch that Galadriel gave back to him. There are no words even, it's just him holding it, putting it down, and then finally picking it back up again. And then the Númenórean part of this episode ends with pure hope as we see the ships departing for Middle-earth. For Durin and the elves in this episode, we have a similar conflict over whether they can work together for the betterment of both or whether their interests are too at odds. And there's very limited trust here among them, and the trust that there is between Durin and Elrond is really put to the test. I really felt the intensity of the conflict most strongly in this part of the episode. For those of you who've been following any of my previous Rings of Power videos, you'll know that Elrond and Durin have consistently been among my favorite parts of all the episodes, and Disa too. She was missed here. And this episode is no exception. Probably the most controversial part of this episode, we see that Gil-galad decides to put a lot of pressure on Elrond to reveal to him everything he knows about Mithril, because Gil-galad believes that Mithril, he doesn't have a name for it, but the ore that the dwarves have been looking for might contain the light of the lost Silmaril and would be protective, because the light of the Eldar is fading and blight and corruption is creeping into Lindon. So that much is true, but whether or not the Mithril could actually help them in any way is very much unknown. And that seems to be the part that's definitely controversial for a lot of people. The main thing I would say about that is, let's not forget, there's nothing that says that Gil-galad is right. And the interpretation of this that I think makes the most sense to me is that he believes this because Sauron wants him to believe it. We know that Sauron, in some way or another, lies to the elves. Could this be it? Could this be something he wants them to believe so that they are in conflict with the dwarves, or so that they're mining the Mithril? And who knows? I could believe, more so than that Mithril would actually help them. But Gil-galad believes it, and he puts a lot of pressure on Elrond. Elrond is feeling this heavy burden that's placed against his oath, and he feels his oath as strongly. I will say, I was definitely frustrated with Gil-galad for not really seeming to put any weight on that oath that Elrond gave. But Gil-galad did say one thing that was correct. Elrond says that he doesn't want to betray an oath for mere hope. And Gil-galad says that hope is never mere, no matter how meager. That, I think, is absolutely correct, and I think that is really at the heart of the theme that this episode and the show as a whole is exploring. So Gil-galad is placing his hope in Mithril, and his despair is the idea that if the elves are forced to abandon Middle-earth, that everyone would be destroyed, all peoples would be destroyed. So again, very heavy despair. Celebrimbor adds to Elrond's doubts because he seems to believe it's possible as well. No pressure, Elrond. But Elrond retains enough, just a spark of hope, enough that he does reveal his burden to Durin. And then you have one of my favorite exchanges. Elrond: a burden shared may either be halved or doubled, depending on the heart that receives it. Durin: give me the meat and give it to me raw. No notes. That was perfect. And Elrond is right, because by sharing his burden, it is halved, because Durin has the heart of a true friend. The mix of humor and weightiness in this scene was really perfect for me. Some people might think that Elrond's burden was lifted a little too quickly, but I don't see it that way, because I think Elrond's decision to tell Durin the truth and Durin's response are perfectly encapsulating the theme that this episode is going for. Giving in to either hope or despair, neither is going to guarantee avoidance of pain or loss. But choosing the path of hope is always the right choice, and sharing a burden is always better. What are your thoughts on how the show is handling this theme? Let me know in the comments. Leave me a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you next time.